It was a Tuesday morning when Ava Collins first felt it. Just a dull, strange ache behind her eyes, like something heavy pressing inward. She thought maybe it was just another tension headache. She'd had a rough night after all, tossing and turning in bed, half asleep, half worrying about her grandson's college applications and that persistent leak under the kitchen sink. She took 2 sips of lukewarm coffee and rubbed her temples, muttering to herself, "Maybe I didn't sleep right." But something was different this time. It wasn't just the pain, it was the way her hands trembled slightly when she tried to open the fridge. Ava had always been strong, the kind of woman who didn't like asking for help. She raised 3 children on her own after her husband passed, worked 30 years as a librarian, and volunteered at the community center every weekend. Her neighbors often joked that Ava, now 66, had more energy than people half her age. So when her left arm felt heavier than usual that morning, when the coffee mug slipped just a little before she caught it, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe she'd just slept on it funny. Denial in that moment felt easier than fear. But that feeling didn't go away. In fact, it spread. By mid-morning, Ava's vision blurred when she turned her head too quickly. A slow dizziness crept in, like the world was tilting just a bit off its axis. Still, she didn't call anyone. "Don't make a fuss," she whispered to herself, steadying her palm against the counter. "You're just tired." But deep down, a whisper of worry started to rise. Something wasn't right. And when she tried to speak, just to answer the phone ringing in the other room, her words stumbled, tangled, like her mouth had forgotten how to shape them. That's when she fell. Not a dramatic crash, not at first. Her knees buckled gently, and she slumped to the kitchen floor like a marionette whose strings had been clipped. Her breathing was shallow, her thoughts foggy. But what scared her most was the silence in her own mind. No clear thoughts, no words forming, just a loud, invisible pressure swelling behind her eyes. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Dempsey, who found her. She'd come by to drop off fresh tomatoes from her garden. One look at Ava on the floor, half conscious, her face slack on one side, and she knew something was terribly wrong. The ambulance arrived fast, lights flashing, voices urgent. "Possible stroke," one of the paramedics said. Ava, drifting in and out of consciousness, couldn't respond, but a single tear slid down her cheek as she heard those words. Stroke? She hadn't even felt sick. She took walks every morning. She watched her diet. She wasn't one of those people, was she? Her mind reached for answers, for something to hold on to, but the pressure in her head was building like a storm. At the hospital, everything happened in blur. The CT scan, the murmured consultations, the tense expressions of the doctors. When they finally spoke to her daughter, Lisa, the words were heavy and clinical. Intracerebral hemorrhage, bleeding in the brain. The doctors explained that a small artery deep inside Ava's brain had ruptured, causing blood to flood the surrounding tissues, pressing dangerously on vital areas. Time is critical, they said. This isn't like an ischemic stroke, it's a hemorrhage. We need to reduce the pressure immediately. For Lisa, those words hit like a brick. She had just talked to her mother the day before. Ava had sounded fine, cheerful even. How could this happen so suddenly, so violently? She stood outside the ICU window, watching her mother, now unconscious, surrounded by beeping monitors and tubes. She looked so small in that bed, so unlike herself. Over the next 48 hours, Ava was kept under close watch. Medications were used to control the swelling. Doctors debated surgery, but ultimately opted for conservative management, hoping the bleeding would stabilize. Friends and family poured in, bringing flowers, food, prayers. But it wasn't until day 3 that Ava stirred. She opened her eyes, just barely, and for the first time since that morning, she whispered a word, "Lisa." That single moment, small, soft, but full of life, changed everything. Recovery wasn't easy. Ava struggled to find her words, to move her left arm, to remember what day it was. But she was awake, alive, determined. "You're not going to keep me down that easy," she whispered hoarsely to the nurse one morning, her old spark flickering through the exhaustion. And from there, her journey truly began, not just a medical recovery, but a transformation. Ava started to understand things she'd never thought about before. The role of silent high blood pressure, the hidden dangers of overworking yourself, the subtle signs that our bodies whisper long before they scream. She looked back and realized she'd ignored headaches for weeks, that she had stopped taking her blood pressure meds regularly, thinking she didn't need them anymore. that she had shrugged off the dizziness because she didn't want to be seen as weak. This wasn't just a stroke. It was a wake-up call, not just for Ava, but for her family too. Lisa scheduled a checkup that same week. Her son, Jacob, started tracking his own blood pressure. Neighbors began asking questions, sharing stories. "Did you hear about Ava?" one said. "Strongest woman I know, but even she didn't see it coming." And so this story, Ava's story, isn't just about a brain hemorrhage. It's about listening to your body, your heart, your fatigue. It's about not brushing off the signs because you're too busy or don't want to bother anyone. Ava was lucky. She got help in time, but many don't. And what happened to her can happen to any of us, without warning, without mercy. So, if you're here, listening now, maybe it's not just curiosity, maybe it's something deeper, a little nudge telling you to pay attention, to check in with yourself, your health, your habits, not tomorrow, not when things calm down, but today. Because sometimes all it takes is one ignored symptom and everything changes. Ava always woke up before sunrise. It was part of her routine: make the bed, stretch by the window, sip her coffee in silence before the neighborhood stirred. But that morning felt off. The air was unusually still. The sunlight, even as it poured through the blinds, didn't bring its usual comfort. And then there was the headache. Not pounding, not sharp, just this deep, slow throb behind her right eye, like something pressing from the inside out. She tried to push through. "Just a little fatigue," she told herself as she pulled on her cardigan and shuffled into the kitchen. Her old coffee pot hissed and gurgled, filling the room with its familiar scent. But as she reached for the cupboard, her hand hesitated midair, like it had forgotten what it was doing. Ava paused, shook her wrist gently, and carried on. By the time she reached the sink to rinse an apple, a strange tightness crept down her neck and along her jaw. It wasn't pain exactly, but it made her feel oddly detached from her own body. She stood there, staring at the running water, trying to remember what she had planned for the day. Groceries, a walk, church, everything blurred together. Then came the coffee mug. She gripped it in her right hand, the one that had always been steady, even through years of sorting heavy library books and carrying casserole dishes to church potlucks. But now it felt unstable, as if her fingers didn't trust themselves. The mug slipped slightly, clinking against the counter, and for the first time, Ava felt a chill not caused by cold air. She looked down at her hand and realized she couldn't quite feel her thumb. She sat down, slowly, deliberately. The chair creaked under her weight, and for a few seconds she just stared ahead, as if her brain was trying to organize what her body was telling her. "This isn't right," she finally whispered. But before she could stand back up, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and the edges of the room began to darken. She managed to crawl to her phone on the counter, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. Her mind screamed for help, but her mouth, it wouldn't open, or maybe it did, but no words came out. Everything that made Ava who she was, the voice that read stories to her grandchildren, the arms that held her daughter tight during funerals and births, the legs that had walked her through decades of hardship, were no longer hers. And then, just before the darkness fully pulled her under, she heard a knock. Mrs. Dempsey's tomatoes saved her life. That's what the nurses would say later. Ava wouldn't remember much of those first few hours, only the blare of the siren, the cold of the stretcher beneath her, and flashes of bright hospital lights above. Lisa, her daughter, arrived within 20 minutes of the call. She rushed into the ER, heart racing, eyes wide. The nurse pulled her aside and spoke gently, but the words felt like thunder. "We suspect a brain hemorrhage." Lisa's knees buckled. "But she's healthy. She walks every day. She watches what she eats. She's Ava." The nurse nodded softly. "Sometimes it happens without warning. We're doing everything we can." That day would become a marker in their family's timeline, a before and after. Before the hemorrhage, Ava was unstoppable. After, she was vulnerable, and for the first time, everyone saw it. In the ICU, machines beeped softly, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. Lisa sat beside her mother's bed, holding a hand that once held hers through every scraped knee and broken heart. Ava looked peaceful, even beautiful in that unnatural stillness, but Lisa couldn't shake the fear that behind that peace was something far more terrifying. Silence, absence. When the doctor came in, a calm woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tone, Lisa braced herself. "It's a hemorrhagic stroke," she explained. bleeding inside the brain, likely caused by high blood pressure that's gone unnoticed or untreated for some time. Lisa blinked, but she's never complained of anything. Many don't, the doctor replied. High blood pressure is called the silent killer for a reason. It doesn't always come with pain or warning signs, but over time it weakens the blood vessels, and sometimes they burst. Lisa swallowed hard. Is she going to? We don't know yet. She's stable for now, but the first 72 hours are critical. We're monitoring the pressure in her brain, trying to prevent swelling. If the bleeding stops and the swelling doesn't worsen, she may not need surgery, but recovery will be a journey. Lisa nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She's strong, she said, her voice shaking. She always has been. The doctor gave a gentle smile. Let's hope her strength pulls her through. And so, the waiting began. Hours folded into days. Ava's family took turns sitting by her bedside. Her grandson left her a note. Get better soon, Grandma. You're the bravest person I know. Her church group brought flowers and meals. The nurses whispered to each other that Ava had a kind face, even in unconsciousness. But Ava was somewhere deep inside herself, fighting, not with fists or words, but with the quiet resolve that had carried her through decades of hardship. And on the third morning, as Lisa sat holding her mother's hand and humming one of Ava's favorite hymns, a finger moved, just a twitch. Then Ava's eyes fluttered open, only halfway, but enough to see her daughter's face, streaked with tears and hope. And then, as softly as a feather falling to the floor, Ava whispered, Lisa. The day Ava finally opened her eyes, the entire ICU felt it. The rhythm of the machines remained the same, but for her family, the air shifted. Less sterile, more sacred. Lisa leaned in, eyes wide, heart thudding. Mom? She whispered. Ava's lips barely moved, but they formed the syllable again. Lee-sa. It wasn't just a name, it was proof. Proof that Ava was still there, that her mind, her memories, her essence had survived the storm inside her skull. Lisa pressed her forehead gently to her mother's, whispering, You're here. You're back. But as the day went on, it became clear that Ava wasn't all the way back, not yet. A nurse came in with a warm smile and a clipboard. Let's see how you're doing, Miss Collins, she said gently. She held up 2 fingers. Can you tell me how many fingers I'm holding up? Ava blinked, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Only a soft groan, as if her mind and body were suddenly foreign to each other. Okay, that's all right, the nurse said, keeping her voice calm and steady. She turned to Lisa. This is common. After a brain hemorrhage, especially one that affects the left hemisphere, language and comprehension can be temporarily, or sometimes permanently, disrupted. But she's aware. That's huge. Lisa nodded slowly, but her throat tightened with emotion. The Ava she knew could do crossword puzzles in pen. She could recite poetry from memory. She could talk circles around anyone in her book club. And now, she couldn't even say the word to. Later that afternoon, the neurologist arrived. A tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and a quiet, methodical presence. He reviewed Ava's scans with Lisa in the family room, away from the beeping machines. He pointed to a cloudy patch on the image. This is the hematoma, the pooled blood pressing on the language center. It explains why her speech is affected. Lisa stared at it, that dark blot on the gray and white map of her mother's mind. Can she get it back? There's a good chance, he said, nodding. We've seen remarkable recoveries, but it'll take time. Speech therapy, cognitive exercises, patience. Recovery isn't linear. Some days will feel like progress, others, setbacks. Lisa returned to the room and sat beside Ava's bed. She took out a small notepad and scribbled a word in large letters. Lisa, then another. Coffee, then home. She showed them to Ava, one at a time. Ava squinted, trying to form the sounds. Her lips moved silently. Then, with great effort, she pressed her finger against the word coffee. A tear slipped down Lisa's cheek. I'll bring your favorite tomorrow, with extra cream. That night, Ava dreamed, not chaotic, feverish dreams, but vivid scenes of her old life. Her library, filled with shelves and whispering patrons. Her garden, rows of tomatoes like the ones Mrs. Dempsey brought. Her husband, Harold, smiling across the breakfast table. But when she tried to speak in the dream, her voice came out in static. She awoke with a start, frustrated and aching. She tried to say dream, but it came out slurred and thick. A young speech therapist named Nora arrived the next day, wheeling in a board with colored pictures and simple words. "Let's try to find your voice again, Ava," she said cheerfully. Nora spoke to her like a peer, not a patient. Ava liked that. They began with basic tasks, identifying objects, mimicking sounds, reading short phrases. Sometimes Ava cried in frustration. Sometimes she giggled unexpectedly when the wrong word came out. And sometimes she surprised them all. By the end of the week, she could say apple, light, chair. And when Lisa came in on Friday morning with her usual warm smile and coffee in hand, Ava looked up and whispered, "You look tired." Lisa burst into laughter. "Still the sass, huh?" Ava smiled faintly. It was lopsided, but genuine. Behind the scenes, doctors kept a close eye on the clot. A second CT scan showed signs that the hematoma was shrinking. No signs of new bleeding. The medication was working, and Ava's blood pressure had stabilized, thanks in part to IV drugs and a new oral regimen that would later become part of her daily life. But for now, Ava was still in a fragile state. She couldn't walk unassisted. Her left hand trembled when she tried to grip a spoon. The swelling in her brain had reduced, but fatigue blanketed her like a weight. Even sitting upright felt like a small mountain climb. One night, after the nurses dimmed the lights, Ava whispered to Lisa, "I scared." Lisa took her mother's hand and squeezed it. "I know, Mom. I was scared too." "Don't leave," Ava managed. "I won't," Lisa promised. "We're in this together." And they were. Ava's story wasn't just about the hemorrhage. It was about rediscovery, relearning how to communicate, how to trust her body again, how to accept help after a lifetime of giving it. Every day she found a little more of herself, in the way her fingers began to obey again, in the sound of her own voice returning, syllable by syllable, in the way she could finally look at her reflection in the hospital mirror and recognize the woman staring back. That woman had been through something life-altering, and she wasn't finished yet. Before the hospital, before the fall, before her world turned dim and slow, Ava had already known what it meant to lose someone suddenly. It had happened 23 years earlier, on a rainy November morning, in the small, worn-down bathroom of their first home. Harold Collins was brushing his teeth when it happened. He had just finished fussing with the clogged sink, always fixing things, always tinkering. The sound of the electric toothbrush whirred through the house as Ava stirred oatmeal in the kitchen. Humming a hymn and watching the rain trickle down the window pane, she called out, "Do you want cinnamon or plain today?" No answer. She thought nothing of it. Harold was a quiet man, especially in the mornings, but when the silence stretched a bit too long, something nudged her. A feeling, subtle but undeniable. She turned off the stove and walked down the hall. He was slumped over the sink, one arm hanging uselessly to the side, the toothbrush still buzzing in his limp hand. For a moment, Ava stood frozen in the doorway, her mind trying to make sense of the sight. He looked as though he had simply fallen asleep standing up. "Harold?" she said, her voice trembling. He didn't move. She rushed forward, grabbing his shoulders, shaking him gently. "Harold, say something!" But he couldn't. His eyes were wide open, terrified, but his mouth hung slack and his legs buckled as she caught him, screaming for help. The doctor said it was a massive stroke. A clot, they explained, had blocked blood flow to the brain. Within minutes, the damage had begun. Harold never spoke another full sentence. He survived 6 more months, but it was a different kind of life, a quiet, distant echo of the man he used to be. Ava had carried that trauma with her every day since. And now, lying in the hospital bed, fighting through her own brain trauma, the memory came rushing back like a cold wave. She didn't need to say it aloud. Lisa saw it in her eyes. "You're thinking about Dad, aren't you?" Lisa said gently, sitting at her bedside with a hand resting on Ava's leg. Ava blinked slowly and gave the smallest of nods. Lisa took a breath. "I remember that day. I was 13. I still remember the oatmeal you left on the stove. You were so calm on the outside, but I know. You were breaking inside." Ava tried to form a word. "Same," she finally whispered. Lisa nodded. "But this time is different, Mom. You're still here, and we're going to bring you back. All the way back." That night, Ava couldn't sleep. The hum of the machines, the soft murmurs from the hallway, the memories of Harold, everything mixed into a restless fog. But beneath it all was something else. Guilt. She had watched it happen to him. She had lived through the aftermath, and yet, somehow, she had convinced herself she was different, that she was healthy, that the occasional headache or skipped blood pressure pill wasn't a big deal. But now she understood. What happened to Harold hadn't been some random act of fate. It was a warning she had ignored in her own life. The next morning, Nora, the speech therapist, arrived with new exercises. Simple picture cards, word games, small steps toward rebuilding Ava's vocabulary. But Ava stopped her before she could begin. "Story," Ava said slowly, her voice like gravel. "Story?" Nora asked, tilting her head. Ava nodded, then pointed to herself. "Tell story." And so they did. Over the next few sessions, Ava began recounting Harold's story through halting words, trembling gestures, and sometimes just tears. It wasn't therapy in the traditional sense, but it was healing. Nora saw it immediately. The emotional release seemed to unlock something inside Ava, like her voice had been trapped behind that memory all these years. One day, during an afternoon session, Ava surprised everyone. She looked directly at Nora and said, slowly but clearly, "My husband died, same, like me." Nora put down the flashcards and smiled softly. "Not like you, Ava. You're still writing your story." The days passed and Ava's speech improved. It wasn't fast or flawless, but the wall had cracked. She could now say a few sentences without stalling. She could name objects, describe feelings, and ask for what she needed. Most importantly, she was reclaiming her sense of control. Lisa noticed the change too. "You're stronger than I thought possible," she said one morning, helping Ava sip warm broth. "Dad would be proud." Ava chuckled faintly. "He hated soup," she said, the corners of her lips curling into a smile. Lisa laughed through her tears. "He really did." The hospital staff began talking about the next step, rehab, intensive physical and speech therapy in a specialized center. Ava was hesitant. She had just started feeling safe again, surrounded by familiar faces. But a quiet voice inside reminded her, if she didn't keep going, she might stop entirely, and she couldn't let that happen, not after everything. As Lisa wheeled her into the rehab center 2 days later, Ava looked up at the sign above the entrance and whispered, "Chapter 2. The rehab center was quiet in a way hospitals never could be. There were no blaring sirens, no rapid footsteps outside her door, no code calls echoing through the halls. Instead, there was the gentle shuffle of walkers on linoleum, the occasional click of a nurse's shoes, and the low hum of televisions tuned to daytime talk shows no one really watched. Ava sat by the window of her room on her second day there, watching a sparrow peck at the flower bed outside. Her hands rested on a soft blue blanket that Lisa had brought from home. The familiar scent of lavender from her pillow helped her sleep the night before, though her dreams still came tangled and thick, full of Harold's voice and rain-soaked memories. She had just returned from her early morning physical therapy session. Her legs were still weak, especially the left one, but she had managed to stand with support today. It was a tiny victory. The nurse had smiled and said, 1% better is still better, Ms. Collins. Ava had nodded, grateful, but deep down, something unsettled still lingered. She turned to Lisa, who was seated nearby, laptop open on her lap, tapping quietly between work emails and glances at her mother. "CT," Ava said suddenly, softly. Lisa looked up. "What about it, Mom?" Ava tapped her temple gently. "Again." Lisa tilted her head. "You want another CT scan?" Ava nodded slowly. "Check. Again." That afternoon, Lisa brought up the request with the rehab team. At first, they hesitated. Ava was stable, progressing, the bleed had stopped, and her vitals had normalized. "Scans come with radiation exposure," one doctor said. "We usually don't repeat unless there's a clinical reason." But Ava wouldn't let it go. She said it again the next morning. "Check. Brain. Again." The firmness in her tone, though still halting, left little room for doubt. So, they scheduled it. The scan came the following week. Lisa accompanied her mother to the imaging room, holding her hand as they wheeled her in. Ava lay still on the cold table, eyes open, staring at the bright ring of the machine as it whirred around her head. She didn't blink. She didn't move. All she thought about was Harold. When the results came back, the doctor's expression changed ever so slightly. Not panic, but concern. "We didn't expect this," he said, pointing to the screen. There, just adjacent to the original hematoma site, was a small bulge, barely noticeable, easy to miss on the earlier scans. An unruptured cerebral aneurysm. It wasn't large, not yet, but it was there. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. "But she already had a hemorrhage. How is this different?" the doctor explained gently. Her previous bleed was spontaneous, possibly related to chronic high blood pressure weakening a vessel wall. But this, he pointed, is a ballooning of the blood vessel itself. If it bursts, it could cause another, potentially more severe hemorrhage. Ava didn't need every word to understand the gravity. She'd seen Harold suffer, she'd felt the darkness of her own stroke, and now this, another hidden threat inside her brain, waiting. The doctor continued. We caught it early, which is rare. Most people never know they have one until it ruptures, but we have options. The two options were clear: monitor it closely and control her blood pressure meticulously, or consider surgery, a procedure known as clipping or coiling to prevent rupture. Ava listened, quiet. Then she looked at Lisa and whispered, "No, wait." Lisa's eyes welled with tears. "You want the surgery?" Ava nodded. "Fix it, while I still can." The weeks that followed were filled with preparation, more tests, consultations, second opinions. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Wen, a calm, precise woman in her early 40s, spoke with Ava and Lisa at length. The aneurysm is small, but its location is sensitive. If left untreated, the risk of rupture increases with age, with pressure, with stress. Many people live with them their whole lives, but given Ava's history and her previous bleed, I agree this is proactive. Ava asked one question. "Safe?" Dr. Wen answered honestly. "There's always risk, but you're strong, and we caught this early. That changes everything." Surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday. On the eve before the procedure, Lisa brought a small photo album to Ava's bedside. They flipped through it together, pages filled with birthdays, beach vacations, and sleepy-eyed Christmas mornings. One picture stopped them both. Ava, smiling in a sun hat, Harold standing behind her, arms wrapped around her waist. Both looked so full of life. Ava stared at it a long time, then turned to Lisa and said, "I want more days." Lisa squeezed her hand. "You'll get them, Mom. I know you will." The next morning, Ava was wheeled into the surgical suite. The lights above her were bright, sterile, the sounds metallic, precise. But she wasn't afraid, not really. She had already survived the worst once. This time she had chosen the fight before it began. The procedure lasted just over 3 hours. Dr. Wen used a minimally invasive technique, threading a tiny catheter through an artery in Ava's leg all the way up to the brain. There, they inserted soft platinum coils into the aneurysm to seal it off. No more pressure, no more danger. When Ava woke up in recovery, Lisa was already beside her, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "It's done," she whispered. "You did it." Ava looked up at her, eyes heavy but calm. And though her mouth was dry and her words few, the message was unmistakable. I chose to live. 3 days after the surgery, Ava sat by the rehab center's garden path in her wheelchair, wrapped in a soft shawl Lisa had brought from home. The autumn air was crisp, cool enough to remind her of early school mornings from her childhood. She watched a squirrel dart across the courtyard, its cheeks full of something stolen from the bushes. The wind rustled the leaves around her, but her thoughts were louder. It still felt unreal, everything that had happened. The headache, the fall, the hospital, the silence, the surgery. She kept trying to trace the path that led her here, but her mind never landed on just one cause. It was many things, small, silent, accumulative, and that was what frightened her the most. Lisa joined her on the bench nearby, sipping a cup of tea. She smiled, but Ava could see the worry behind her daughter's eyes, still lingering, still watching. "I was thinking about your book club," Lisa said gently. "They all sent cards, even brought cookies yesterday, oatmeal raisin, your favorite." Ava smiled faintly. "Tell them. Thank you." There was a pause. Then Ava said it, something she hadn't admitted aloud until now. "I thought it was just stress." Lisa turned. "When? What do you mean?" Ava took a breath. Her voice was still soft, her words slower than before, but her thoughts were clear. "The headaches, weeks before, the dizzy spells. I kept saying, it's just the weather, or maybe I'm tired." She looked down at her hands. "But I knew something wasn't right." Lisa looked down too. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ava hesitated, then with a small, bittersweet smile, "Mothers don't like to worry their children." Lisa laughed through her nose. "And daughters don't like to lose theirs." A silence settled between them again, heavier this time. Ava continued, slowly. "I would feel pressure here," she said, pointing just above her eyes. "Not pain, but like something was inside, growing, but it always passed. I'd drink water, lie down, and pretend it didn't happen. Lisa's hands clenched slightly in her lap. You were always pushing through, even when you shouldn't, Ava nodded. After Harold died, I couldn't afford to stop. If I stopped, I'd fall apart. Lisa's eyes brimmed. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Ava reached over with her good hand and placed it on Lisa's. I know. Now I know. That conversation stayed with Lisa long after Ava was wheeled back inside for her afternoon therapy. She thought about all the times she'd brushed off her mom's subtle complaints, the times Ava had said, I just need to rest my eyes, or I think I skipped lunch again. All the signs had been there, flickering like warning lights, dimmed by the busyness of life. Later that evening, Ava's doctor visited to review her recovery timeline. He was optimistic, her vitals were stable, her surgical site was healing well, and her speech had improved remarkably for someone only weeks out of a hemorrhagic stroke. But he added something else that stuck. We've seen this pattern in so many patients, he said. People feel the early signs, tiredness, headaches, changes in mood or memory, but they brush it off. They think it's stress, aging, burnout. They normalize symptoms that shouldn't be ignored. Ava listened closely, not just with her ears, but with something deeper. Regret, perhaps, or maybe wisdom earned too late. That night in bed, she stared at the ceiling tiles, counting each one slowly like she used to count books returned on Mondays at the library. In her mind, she replayed the last 2 years before her stroke. The late nights reading by dim light, ignoring how often her eyes strained to stay open. The skipped breakfasts, telling herself she'd eat later, though later often never came. The long walks in the cold without gloves, her hands numb, but her pride too thick to admit she needed to slow down. She remembered a day last fall when she had stood in her kitchen, staring at the stove, unable to remember what she was about to cook. She had laughed it off. Senior moment, she'd muttered, but now she knew better. Ava whispered into the quiet room. It wasn't stress, it was my body, begging me to listen. In the morning, during group therapy, Ava asked to speak. It was something she hadn't done yet, but that day she felt a need. The room was filled with others, some in wheelchairs, some with slings, others silent with eyes full of stories. Ava looked around and said, I used to ignore things, small things, thought I was strong, but strength isn't pretending, it's listening. A few nodded. One woman began to cry. Ava continued, voice steadier now. If I had gone to the doctor sooner, I might have avoided the worst. I thought I didn't have time, but now time is all I want. After the session, a young man in his 40s with a scar along his scalp rolled his chair over to Ava. You said what I've been trying to say for weeks, he told her. Thank you. Ava smiled, placing her hand gently on his. It's not too late for either of us. From that day forward, Ava became a kind of quiet mentor in the rehab center. She didn't talk the most or move the fastest, but people listened when she spoke, because every word carried weight, every smile was earned. And every morning when she woke up, the first thing she whispered to herself wasn't, I'm tired, or this hurts, or why me? It was, listen, because she'd learned the hard way that our bodies speak long before they scream. And if we honor the whispers, we may never have to face the roar. Ava had always remembered the way Harold's eyes looked that day, wide, glassy, and somehow distant, as if he was there but already slipping away. It haunted her for years. Not just because of the fear, but because she couldn't unsee how helpless he was, how quickly the strong man who built their garden beds and taught their son to ride a bike had become silent, limp, and unreachable. Now, after everything she'd endured herself, she understood that moment far better than she ever had. She understood what it felt like to have the brain betray you, how it feels when something inside begins to swell and tighten, pressing on things it shouldn't, stealing away pieces of you, not just words or movement, but presence. She remembered the way the doctor described it back then. The blood is pressing on his brain, that phrase, cold, factual, but to Ava, it had sounded like a slow suffocation from the inside, and that's exactly what it was. She had asked the doctor at the time, can you relieve the pressure? And he had sighed before answering, we're doing what we can, but it's a race against time. That's what she was in now, what she had lived through, a race against time. In her hospital bed, recovering from both a hemorrhage and a successful aneurysm surgery, Ava stared at the ceiling one afternoon and whispered the words again, just to herself. the blood, pressing on the brain. This time, the words weren't about Harold. They were about her. For years, she had misunderstood what he went through. She had been patient, of course, loving, devoted. She had held his hand through his frustration, wiped his face when he couldn't do it himself, guessed at the words he was trying to say when he could only grunt or blink. But she had never truly known the terror of being trapped inside your own mind, not until now. Her own stroke had given her access to a silent world that Harold must have lived in during those last 6 months. It was humbling and heartbreaking. She began thinking back to little things, how Harold would sometimes cry without warning or become angry when he couldn't explain what he wanted, how he'd push away a spoon, not because he didn't want to eat, but because his brain no longer recognized the motion. She had been patient, but now she realized she hadn't understood. And so, in a strange and painful way, the stroke had brought her closer to her husband, years after he was gone. During one of her speech therapy sessions, she asked Nora for a favor. "Can you help me write?" "Of course," Nora said, surprised but smiling. "What would you like to write?" Ava closed her eyes. "A letter to Harold." They spent the next week working on it. Ava dictated a few words at a time, and Nora helped her string them together. It wasn't perfect. Her phrasing was simple, broken in places, but it was hers, and it was healing. When it was finished, Ava asked Lisa to read it aloud to her. Lisa sat beside the bed, unfolded the paper, and began. "Dear Harold, I never knew what it felt like. Not really. I thought I did, but I didn't. You tried so hard to tell me things after your stroke. I see that now. And I'm sorry for every moment I rushed you or every time I guessed wrong and gave up. I know now how heavy the silence is, how terrifying it is to want to speak but have nothing come out. I felt it too. You were so brave, Harold. You never complained, even when you had every reason to. And now I understand what strength that took. I wish I could sit with you again, not just as your wife, but as someone who truly understands. I love you, and I promise. I'll use every day I've been given to honor the time you didn't get. Love, Ava." When Lisa finished reading, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and kissed her mother's forehead. "That was beautiful, Mom. He'd be proud of you." Ava looked down at her lap and whispered, "It's not just my second chance. It's his too. Through me." Later that evening, Lisa asked the doctor if Ava could get access to the rehab garden more often, especially in the late afternoons. "It helps her feel more connected," she explained, "to him, to everything." The doctor agreed. Each evening, Ava sat under the oak tree near the far end of the garden, bundled in her shawl, notebook on her lap. She didn't always write. Sometimes she just stared at the sky, watching the colors fade into dusk. But something in her was different now, not just physically healing, but spiritually waking up. The Ava who had ignored her blood pressure, who had worked through fatigue, who had dismissed dizziness as just age, was gone. In her place was a woman who had been to the brink and come back with clarity. She started keeping a small journal with 3 sections each day: what I noticed, what I felt, what I will do. And every day, the first sentence she wrote under what I noticed was the same. My body speaks. Now I listen. It was something Harold never had the chance to do, but Ava could, and she would, for both of them. The first 24 hours after Ava's collapse had been a blur, a patchwork of flashing lights, cold metal, and unfamiliar voices. But Lisa remembered every second. She had just gotten out of a staff meeting when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside her sank before she even answered. It wasn't just intuition, it was the silence that followed the ring, the kind that presses itself into your chest like a weight. "This is Fairfax Medical Center," the voice said. "Is this Lisa Collins?" The woman on the phone was calm, measured, but the words "your mother," "collapsed," and "possible brain bleed" hit Lisa like a flood. She barely remembered grabbing her keys or what street she took. Only the feeling, panic edged with disbelief. Her mother, Ava, the strongest woman she knew, was in the emergency room fighting for her life. By the time Lisa arrived, Ava was already in a CT scanner, surrounded by a flurry of nurses and techs. A trauma doctor, a tall man named Dr. Kamal, approached her in the waiting room. "She's stable, but it's serious," he said gently. "Your mother had a hemorrhagic stroke, bleeding in the brain. We're seeing swelling that we need to control immediately. That's what's threatening her life right now, not just the bleed, but the pressure it's creating." Lisa's throat tightened. "Can you fix it? "We're going to try," he said. "Our priority is reducing the intracranial pressure. If it builds too much, it could cause permanent damage, or worse." Behind the closed doors, Ava lay unconscious in a sterile white room. Monitors beeped around her, each one tracking a different signal of life. Her brain was bleeding, and the swelling was beginning to suffocate critical pathways, areas that controlled speech, movement, and consciousness itself. The neurocritical care team acted fast. First, they started Ava on hyperosmolar therapy, a high-concentration saline solution delivered through an IV to pull fluid out of the brain tissue and relieve swelling. At the same time, they elevated her head to improve venous drainage. They monitored every number: her heart rate, her oxygen, her blood pressure. "Keep her systolic under 140, one doctor ordered. "We can't let this bleed expand." A nurse carefully adjusted the infusion pump, her hands steady but quick. Then came the second decision, whether to drain excess cerebrospinal fluid to relieve pressure. The neurosurgeon on call, Dr. Wen, reviewed the CT images again and again. "There's a midline shift," she told the team, "but it's slight. If the edema worsens, we'll need to place an external ventricular drain." Lisa had no idea what any of that meant when they explained it to her, but she nodded anyway. "Do what you need to do. Just bring her back." For hours, Ava's brain was a battlefield, one side fighting to survive, the other slipping quietly into shutdown. The swelling had pushed into areas near the thalamus, interrupting her alertness and reflexes. The bleed itself had settled in the left basal ganglia, which explained her loss of speech and right-sided weakness. But as the team continued their aggressive response, something shifted. By midnight, the swelling plateaued. The saline was working. Ava's pupils began to respond to light again. Her breathing, though still labored, was stable. No surgical drain was needed, not yet. "She's turning a corner," Dr. Wen said softly to Lisa. "We've got a window now, small but real." Lisa leaned against the wall, her knees weak. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on her." The next morning, Ava opened her eyes. She didn't speak, she didn't smile, but her eyes found Lisa's face and held it. And in that moment, something passed between them that no machine could measure. Later, Lisa sat with Dr. Wen to review what had happened in those frantic hours. "She was lucky," Dr. Wen said honestly. "Many people with bleeds in that location don't make it to the hospital awake. And if the pressure had risen much more, we would have lost her." Lisa stared down at the scan on the screen, tracing the dark bloom of blood in the brain. "What caused it?" she asked. "She was healthy. She walked every day, ate well." Dr. Wen paused. "The leading cause is uncontrolled high blood pressure. Many people think they're fine because they don't feel symptoms, but pressure builds over time. The blood vessels in the brain are delicate. They don't always give warnings before they burst." Lisa remembered her mom brushing off those dizzy spells, skipping her pressure meds because they made her sleepy, not wanting to be a burden by going to the doctor. It all made sense now, in a cruel, gut-punching way. "She thought it was just stress," Lisa murmured. Dr. Wen nodded. "We hear that every day." Back in her room, Ava began to stir, a few words, a flutter of her fingers, her body slowly waking from the storm. The ICU nurses told Lisa later that they'd never forget Ava's file. "The woman who fought the swelling," they said, "the one who made it back." And Ava did fight, quietly but fiercely. She couldn't remember the hours that the doctors rushed around her, couldn't feel the IV pushing medication into her veins, or the ice packs they used to keep her temperature down. But she remembered one thing: darkness closing in, and then light, a voice, her daughter's voice. "I'm here, Mom, you're not alone." That voice had become her anchor. In the weeks that followed, as Ava recovered slowly in rehab, Lisa shared the story of those first 24 hours with her, piece by piece. And Ava listened, really listened. At the end of it, she took her daughter's hand and whispered, "You saved me." Lisa shook her head. "No, you saved yourself. We just caught you before you drifted too far." The first time Ava tried to lift her right arm after the stroke, it barely moved. The muscles were there, the bones intact, but the command from her brain never arrived. It was like her body had become a foreign language, and she no longer spoke it. She stared at her hand for a long time that morning. The way it sat limply in her lap reminded her of Harold's right hand all those years ago. She used to hold it between both of hers as they sat in the sunroom, pretending it was for warmth. But really, it was her way of holding on, to him, to hope, to the part of their life that felt salvageable. Now, here she was, on the other side of that story, and her own right hand wouldn't even twitch. Lisa had come in early that day, bringing a thermos of hot cocoa and a small bouquet of garden flowers wrapped in twine. She noticed the look in her mother's eyes right away. "What is it, Mom?" she asked softly. Ava glanced at her hand. "Same as him," she whispered. Lisa knelt beside the wheelchair. "You're not the same as Dad," she said firmly. "This is part of healing. You're already further than he ever got. We're going to keep going, 1 inch at a time." But Ava's mind was already drifting, back to the time when she watched Harold try to hold a spoon. His face contorted with frustration, his shoulders slumping with defeat. Ava had always been the calm one, the encourager, but inside she had burned with helplessness, and now, sitting in that sterile rehab room, she understood the depth of that burn. Relearning how to move a body that used to obey effortlessly, that was the cruelest part of it all. The physical therapist that morning was named Ben. He was tall, gentle, and carried a kind of quiet confidence Ava respected. He wheeled her into the therapy room where the walls were lined with mirrors and resistance bands hung like vines. On one side, another patient was practicing standing up from a chair. On the other, an elderly man was lifting small foam weights with trembling arms. "We'll start small," Ben said, pulling up a chair. "The goal isn't to push your body, it's to reconnect it." Ava nodded. "Brain? Forgot," she said. "Exactly," Ben smiled. "But it can remember. The brain is a better student than we give it credit for." They began with visualization. "Close your eyes," he said, "and picture your right hand closing into a fist. Not forcing it. Just see it." Ava did. She pictured her hand the way it used to move, holding a pen, slicing carrots, patting Lisa's shoulder. And in her mind, it closed perfectly. But when she opened her eyes, it hadn't moved at all. Ben smiled. "That's okay. That's a rep. Even if your hand doesn't move yet, your brain is building the path." That word, yet, became the cornerstone of her healing. "I can't" turned into "I can't yet." It gave her something to chase, something to believe in. Each day, Ben returned with new challenges. Finger taps, wrist curls, stretch bands. They used electrical stimulation pads to gently wake up the nerves. Ava would sit in silence, watching the tiny twitches in her fingers like they were magic, because, in a way, they were. Every millimeter of motion was earned. Every signal sent from her brain that made it to her hand felt like a victory. But the most emotional moment came 2 weeks into therapy. Ben handed her a soft rubber ball and said, "Let's try this today." Ava looked down at her right hand. She'd been doing strengthening with her left, but her right, she hadn't held anything with it since the stroke. She took a breath and placed the ball on her lap. Then, with painful slowness, she used her left hand to position her right palm around it. Her fingers didn't wrap fully, but she could feel the texture of the rubber against her skin. Then, for the first time, she squeezed. It was barely noticeable, but it was real. Ben's face lit up. "That's it! That's the connection!" Tears filled Ava's eyes. "I did it?" "You did," Ben said. "We're just getting started." When Lisa came in later, Ava lifted the ball with both hands, awkwardly, shakily, and held it up like a trophy. Lisa laughed, then burst into tears. "Oh, Mom, this is everything." That night, as Ava lay in bed, she stared at her right hand again. She still couldn't sign her name, still couldn't tie her shoes or slice fruit. But now, the hand didn't look useless. It looked like a fighter. She whispered into the darkness, "We're not done, you and me." In her dreams that night, Harold was there again. Not the silent, broken version she remembered from his last months, but the one from years before. Strong, smiling, reaching for her hand. And this time, she reached back with her right. They stood together in the kitchen. She could hear him say, "You're doing what I couldn't." And Ava smiled, even in her sleep. The decision hung in the air for 3 long days. Ava sat by the window in her rehab room, the late afternoon sun slanting in, casting warm orange light across her blanket. She watched 2 young nurses laughing in the courtyard below, their laughter floating up like birdsong. It was comforting and distant at the same time, like something from another world, untouched by medical scans and quiet beeping machines. Lisa sat across from her, silent, her hand loosely holding a folded pamphlet. On the cover, "Cerebral aneurysms, your options." Dr. Wen had delivered the news calmly but without sugarcoating. "We found a small aneurysm near the same region where the previous hemorrhage occurred. It hasn't ruptured, but given your medical history, it's a risk. Ava had stared at her without blinking. Can it kill me? Dr. Wen nodded. If it ruptures, yes. Not always, but the odds are serious. You've already had one hemorrhage. This increases the danger. What do we do? Lisa had asked. There are two main paths, Dr. Wen explained. We monitor it closely, manage blood pressure aggressively, and hope it remains stable. Or we intervene with surgery. We can either clip it with open surgery or coil it using a catheter through an artery. Lisa had looked at her mother. Ava hadn't said anything then. She just closed her eyes. And now, days later, they still hadn't spoken much about it, until Ava broke the silence. Time? She said softly. Lisa looked up. What about time? Feels shorter now. Lisa stood and walked to the window, her back to her mother. I know, but you're here, and you're getting better. Ava's voice was steady despite the weakness in her limbs. That aneurysm, it's a clock. Lisa turned, tears welling. You don't have to decide right now. We can talk to more doctors. Wait, just wait. Ava shook her head slowly. We did that with Harold. Waited until there was nothing left to wait for. Lisa's breath caught. Ava continued, her voice firmer now, words clearer. I don't want you sitting by my bed one day, wishing you'd pushed me harder. Lisa knelt beside her. I don't want to lose you on an operating table. You might, Ava whispered, but if we wait, you might lose me anyway, at breakfast, in the shower, while you're parking the car. They sat in silence. The weight of choices, the kind that no one wants to make, settled between them. That night, Ava asked to speak with Dr. Wen again. She arrived early the next morning, still in her scrubs, holding a tablet and a kind, knowing expression. Ava didn't waste time. Do the surgery. Coil it. Dr. Wen gave a small nod. You've thought about it? Ava met her eyes. I've lived it. The following 48 hours were full of preparation. More imaging, blood work, risk assessments, preoperative medications, nurses checking vitals every few hours, consent forms, anesthesiologists, surgical coordinators. But Ava didn't seem afraid, not like Lisa was. Lisa tried to hide it, smiling and chatting normally, but her hands were always cold, her shoulders tense, her words clipped. On the evening before the procedure, Ava reached out, placed her hand over her daughter's, and said softly, I'm not doing this because I'm scared of dying. Lisa looked at her. I'm doing it because I want to keep living, Ava said, not cautiously, not counting days, but living. Lisa broke down. The morning of the surgery was calm, eerily so. Ava was wheeled into the surgical suite, wearing a pale blue cap and covered in warm blankets. The operating room was brightly lit, full of the hum of machines and soft conversations between the surgical team. Dr. Wen gave Ava a reassuring smile as the anesthesiologist gently placed the mask over her face. You'll wake up in a better world, Dr. Wen whispered. The procedure itself was intricate. A thin catheter was inserted through a small incision in Ava's groin, navigated up through the arteries, all the way into her brain. Once they reached the aneurysm, Dr. Wen carefully released tiny platinum coils into the bulging vessel, packing it tightly. This prevented blood from entering and removed the risk of rupture. It was delicate, detailed work. Every movement required precision, every second focused attention, but it went smoothly. Lisa waited in the family room for nearly 4 hours, flipping through magazines she couldn't read, answering calls she didn't remember, pacing without realizing it. When Dr. Wen finally stepped in, mask pulled down and eyes tired but bright, Lisa stood. She did beautifully, the doctor said. Lisa exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. She's in recovery, Dr. Wen continued. You can see her soon. She'll be drowsy, but she'll know you're there. And she did. When Ava opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Lisa's face. Still here, Lisa whispered, voice cracking. Ava smiled. Later, the nurses would say it was one of the fastest recoveries they'd seen for someone her age. Stable vitals, no neurological complications, a successful procedure from start to finish. But for Ava, it wasn't just a medical victory, it was the reclaiming of her future. As she lay there that night, listening to the soft beep of the heart monitor beside her, she thought of Harold again, not as the man who died from a stroke, but the man who had loved her fiercely, who taught her what courage looked like. And now she realized she was carrying that courage forward, not just for herself, but for everyone who never got a second chance. While Ava lay in the operating room, her life suspended in a quiet battle of wires, catheters, and platinum coils, the waiting room outside felt like another universe. Still, cold, stretched with time. Lisa paced the worn carpet, her fingers curled tightly around a paper coffee cup she'd refilled twice but never drank. Her phone sat on the armrest beside her, screen dark, but it may as well have been glowing. Every few minutes she picked it up, checking messages, staring at the wallpaper photo of her mother holding her grandson last Christmas. Ava's eyes had always been so full of life, steady, grounding, and now Lisa wasn't sure what kind of eyes would greet her when this was all over. She wasn't alone. Ava's youngest son, Mark, had flown in late the night before and sat slouched on the far end of the couch, headphones around his neck, knee bouncing with nervous rhythm. He looked like a grown man on the outside, graying hair, laugh lines, but Lisa still saw the boy who used to cry when Ava left for night shifts. "Do you think she's scared?" Mark asked suddenly, his voice quiet. Lisa looked at him. "She's not the one I'm worried about." They both managed a weak laugh, but it faded as quickly as it came. Their Aunt Miriam was there too, Ava's older sister, who'd flown in from North Carolina with a suitcase packed half in worry, half in hope. She held a rosary in her hand, the beads clicking softly as her fingers moved. "This family has a stubborn streak," she muttered, mostly to herself. "We don't go down without a fight." The room was filled with different kinds of faith. Faith in medicine, in timing, in prayer, in the human will to survive. They all waited in silence, each whispering hopes in their own way. For Lisa, it wasn't words she said out loud. It was memories she held onto, like threads she refused to let fray. She remembered Sunday dinners when Ava would hum old tunes while chopping vegetables. She remembered how her mother would always warm the car for her in winter, even when she didn't ask. She remembered the way Ava never left the house without lipstick, not for vanity, but because the day deserves your best. Lisa had rolled her eyes back then. Now she clung to those details like lifelines. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against the wall, the sounds of the waiting room fading into a swirl of beeps and background television static. The hallway door finally opened around noon. Everyone stood instantly, even Miriam, who had spent most of the morning praying in a whisper. Dr. Wen stepped in, removing her surgical cap and tucking a few loose strands of hair behind her ears. Her expression was calm, measured but soft. "She's stable," she began, hands clasped. "The aneurysm has been successfully coiled. No complications during the procedure." Lisa felt her knees weaken, but not from fear this time, from release. "Can we see her?" Mark asked. "Soon," Dr. Wen nodded. "She's still in recovery, but the signs are good. Her vitals are strong. We'll monitor her closely over the next few hours. If all goes well, she'll be moved back to her room by this evening." Lisa exhaled sharply and turned toward the wall to wipe her face without being seen. Dr. Wen placed a hand on Lisa's shoulder. "She made the right call, a brave call." Lisa looked at her. "Thank you for giving us more time." Back in her room that evening, Ava looked pale but peaceful. Her eyes were closed, her breathing deep and even. The swelling from her previous bleed was now under control, and with the aneurysm secured, the threat that had loomed over her had finally lifted. Lisa sat beside her, brushing a strand of silver hair from her forehead. "You made it through," she whispered. Ava's eyes fluttered open slowly. She was groggy but present, her gaze locked onto Lisa's. "I was dreaming," Ava murmured. Lisa smiled, her voice catching. "What about?" Ava blinked slowly. "We were planting tomatoes. You, me, Harold." Lisa laughed softly. "I think that's your way of telling me you're not done yet." Ava gave a tired smile. Later that night, when the rest of the family had gone to get some rest, Lisa sat alone with her mother in the dim hospital room. The TV played quietly in the background, but neither of them was watching. Ava drifted in and out of sleep, and Lisa just stayed. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to reflect, not just on the fear they'd lived through, but on what it had exposed, the things they'd ignored, the warnings they'd brushed off, the love they'd taken for granted in the rush of daily life. She realized that it wasn't just Ava who'd been given another chance. It was all of them, a chance to be more present, to ask how someone's really doing, to stop assuming strength means invincibility. Ava had been their rock for decades, but even rocks can crack under pressure no one sees coming. Lisa leaned closer and whispered, We're going to do better, Mom, all of us. And Ava, eyes still closed, squeezed her daughter's hand ever so gently. In that small motion, barely there but deeply felt, Lisa knew Ava was still fighting, not just to recover, but to live fully, to love fiercely, and to teach, even in silence. The room had been quiet for days, not lifeless, just suspended. Like time itself had taken a deep breath and was holding it. Machines hummed rhythmically, and nurses moved in and out with practiced calm. But for Ava's family, every tick of the clock felt like a question with no answer. Ava lay motionless in her hospital bed, a soft white blanket pulled up to her chest. Her eyelids fluttered sometimes, tiny movements that gave Lisa hope, but she hadn't opened them fully since the surgery. Her body was healing, her vitals had stabilized, the swelling had decreased, but her mind? That was still a mystery. Lisa sat beside her every day, reading aloud from Ava's favorite mystery novels, the kind they used to trade back and forth when Lisa was a teenager. She played soft music, told old stories, held her hand for hours. The doctors called it stimulus engagement. Lisa called it love. And then, on the 7th morning, exactly 1 week since the aneurysm surgery, something shifted. It began with a sound, a low, raspy exhale, then a small, dry cough. Lisa looked up from her book. "Mom," she said quietly, leaning in. Ava stirred, her hand twitching slightly beneath the blanket. Her chest rose a little deeper this time, and then her eyes opened, not wide, not fully alert, but open. Lisa dropped the book, heart pounding. "Mom, can you hear me?" Ava blinked once, then again. Tears sprang to Lisa's eyes. She fumbled for the nurse call button, still half in disbelief. When the nurse arrived, Lisa was laughing and crying all at once. "She's awake. She looked at me." The nurse checked Ava's eyes with a small flashlight, speaking gently. "Ava, can you squeeze my fingers?" Ava's right hand remained still, but her left flexed. Weak, but intentional. The nurse smiled. "Welcome back." Word spread quickly. Mark arrived within the hour. Aunt Miriam brought a single white lily and whispered prayers of thanks. Even Dr. Wen stopped by that evening, standing at the foot of the bed with a soft, proud smile. "She's showing excellent signs," Dr. Wen told the family, opening her eyes voluntarily, tracking sound, responding to basic prompts. "We'll continue cognitive evaluations, but this is a beautiful start." Lisa leaned in, gently brushing her mother's cheek. "You scared us," she whispered, smiling through tears. Ava's lips moved slowly, a sound forming. Lisa paused. "What is it, Mom?" Ava whispered. "What day?" Lisa laughed. "Thursday. You've been sleeping for a week." Ava blinked again, her gaze drifting toward the window where sunlight poured in. Her voice was barely there, but the words came. "Still here," Lisa nodded. "Still here." That night, Ava's room was filled with soft chatter and quiet gratitude. A nurse brought warm broth. Mark read a passage from one of Ava's old gardening journals. Lisa wrapped a scarf around her mother's neck, even though the room was warm, just to make her feel more like herself. As the family trickled out and night settled in, Ava rested again, this time by choice. Her body, though tired, no longer felt foreign. Her mind, though slow, was beginning to return. The next morning, Dr. Patel, the neurologist, arrived for a cognitive check. He was kind but meticulous. "Good morning, Ava," he said cheerfully. "I'm going to ask you a few questions just to see how your brain is waking up, all right?" Ava nodded slowly. "Can you tell me your name?" There was a long pause. Then, with effort, "Ava Collins." "Good. Do you know where you are?" "Hospital." "Do you know why?" "Brain bleed." Dr. Patel smiled, glancing at Lisa. "She's oriented to person, place, and situation. That's very promising." He held up a small object, a red pen. "What is this?" Ava squinted at it. "Right. Correct. Do you remember what year it is?" 2000. She closed her eyes, the rest of the numbers jumbled. "That's okay," he said gently. "We'll work on that." When he left, Lisa squeezed her mother's hand. "You're coming back, Mom, bit by bit." Ava smiled faintly. "Feels like waking from deep water." Lisa nodded. "But now you're breathing again." That afternoon, Ava whispered something that surprised Lisa. "I saw Harold." Lisa paused. "Lisa, in your dream?" Ava nodded. "He said, 'Don't give up.' Then he was gone." Lisa's eyes welled. Maybe he was just making sure you were okay before letting you go. Ava smiled. Or maybe he knew I wasn't ready. She wasn't. And over the next few days, the clarity returned in waves. Sometimes she would forget the day or ask the same question twice. But other times, she'd recall details from years ago with perfect accuracy. She could name all 3 of her children, describe her old house, and even recite part of a poem from memory. "Do not go gentle into that good night," she whispered one morning, her voice fragile but full of meaning. She wasn't going gently. Each small improvement sparked celebration. The first time she fed herself with a spoon, the first time she pushed the call button on her own, the first time she laughed, really laughed, at a joke Lisa made about hospital food. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came a week later during an afternoon therapy session. Her therapist, Nora, laid out a simple card puzzle in front of her. Colors and shapes, nothing complicated. Ava looked down at the pieces, then up at Nora. "You don't need to go slow," she said. Nora smiled. "Why's that?" Ava tapped her temple gently. "My brain came back." The hallway felt longer than Ava remembered. The polished floors seemed to stretch into forever, lined with faded paintings and fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. Each step she took was an act of faith, not just in her body, but in the journey ahead. Her right leg dragged slightly, toes occasionally brushing the floor before catching up. The therapist walked beside her, one hand gently gripping the gait belt around Ava's waist, the other hovering close like a safety net. Ava clutched the walker tightly, her knuckles white, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were fixed forward, determined, focused. Each shuffle was a statement. "I'm still here, and I'm not done." This was her 10th session in the rehab gym, and while the speech therapy had helped her find her voice again, this was the battlefield. Walking, relearning something so basic, so unconscious, was humbling in the deepest way. It made her feel like a child and an elder all at once. And yet, in that awkward rhythm of slow steps and silent encouragement, she felt more alive than she had in months. Her therapist, Ben, walked at her side, always calm, always patient. "You're doing great, Ava. Just a few more feet to the chair." Ava huffed a breath, gritting her teeth. "Chair better. Be gold," she muttered. Ben chuckled. "Solid gold, I promise." Lisa stood at the end of the hall, cheering quietly, phone in hand, filming this small miracle to show Ava later, and to remind herself too that progress, even slow, was still progress. When Ava finally reached the chair and sat down, her whole body trembled. Sweat lined her forehead. Her heart thudded in her ears. But her smile was unstoppable. Ben patted her shoulder. "You're stronger than most people I know." Ava looked up, catching her breath. "You should meet my sister," she joked. Every day, therapy grew a little more demanding. They added stairs, weighted cuffs, balance boards. Speech exercises became longer, moving from syllables to full conversations. Lisa started bringing in old family photos to use during memory games, images of birthdays, weddings, and quiet afternoons on the porch. Some days were smooth. Ava would laugh, string together a full sentence, and lift her right foot with only mild assistance. Other days were hard, words wouldn't come, her balance betrayed her, and she'd cry out of frustration, not pain. But she never gave up. One morning, after a particularly rough session, Lisa wheeled Ava back to her room and helped her sit at the edge of the bed. "I'm tired," Ava whispered, "in my bones." "I know, Mom," Lisa said, kneeling to unlace her shoes. "But you're doing amazing." Ava looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. "You ever wonder why we have to break before we rebuild?" Lisa paused. "Maybe because we wouldn't slow down otherwise." Ava nodded slowly. "I ran for years. After Harold, I never stopped. Thought movement meant I was fine." Lisa sat beside her, eyes misting. "You were strong, but even strength needs rest." Ava rested her head on Lisa's shoulder. "Now I walk, not to run away, but to come back." That week marked a breakthrough. In the rehab gym, Ben set up parallel bars for the first time. "Today," he said with a grin, "you walk without the walker." Ava blinked. "No wheels?" "No wheels," he confirmed. "Just you, and these bars." Lisa held her breath from the sidelines. Ava took a breath, pushed herself up from the chair, and gripped the bars. Her legs trembled, her core clenched. Her left foot stepped forward, then the right, slow, uneven, but hers, step, Pause, step, pause. When she reached the end of the bars, just 20 feet, Ben clapped. "That's it, you did it!" Ava grinned, chest heaving. "I need ice cream," Lisa laughed through tears. "I'll buy you a gallon." As the weeks passed, Ava's progress became more visible. She could walk short distances with a cane. She spoke in full paragraphs, sometimes even cracking jokes. Her right hand still lacked finesse. Writing her name was like drawing with a crayon between numb fingers, but the letters were there. Hers. One afternoon, Lisa brought a small mirror and placed it on the table. "Time to practice your speech," she said gently. "Let's try that poem again." Ava nodded, took a breath, and said, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." Her voice was gravelly, halting, but every word landed. Lisa reached for her hand. "You're the poem now." And Ava, for the first time in a long time, believed it. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the question finally came. Ava and Lisa sat side by side in the hospital garden. The early spring breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the nearby trees. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a park across the street, and somewhere behind them, a wind chime clinked softly with each passing gust. Ava was holding a warm mug of tea in both hands, still with a slight tremble, but far steadier than before. She wore her soft gray sweater and the burgundy scarf Lisa had brought from home. Her legs were propped on a footrest. A cane rested on the arm of her chair like a quiet companion. She looked peaceful, but Lisa noticed the way her mother's brow furrowed as she stared into the distance. "What are you thinking about?" Lisa asked, gently brushing a strand of silver hair behind Ava's ear. Ava was quiet for a moment, then she said it, slowly but clearly. "Could this have been prevented?" Lisa didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, fingers clasped tightly in her lap. She had asked herself the same question 100 times since that day in the kitchen, when the coffee mug slipped and everything changed. "I don't know," Lisa said finally. "Maybe." Ava nodded, lips pressed together in a thoughtful line. Lisa added, "You did everything right, Mom. You ate well, you exercised, you stayed active." Ava tilted her head. "But I didn't listen." Lisa looked up. Ava took a breath. "I told myself dizziness was normal, that forgetting a word was just age. I missed doses of my blood pressure meds. Told myself they made me tired." She looked down at her tea. "I didn't think it mattered." Lisa reached for her hand. "We all do that. We minimize. We think being tired is just part of getting older. We think it's weakness to ask for help." Ava squeezed her daughter's fingers gently. "But you don't get to skip the consequences." That sentence lingered between them. Ava's voice softened. "I watched Harold ignore his health too, brushed off doctor visits, laughed at the idea of wellness checks. I thought I was doing better." She paused, eyes misting. "But I still carried the same pride." Lisa wiped a tear from her cheek. "And I should have noticed. I should have asked more questions." "No," Ava said firmly. "You were being a daughter, trusting your mother to take care of herself." "But I should have pushed you," Lisa whispered. "You'd tell me you were fine and I'd let it go." Ava looked into her daughter's eyes. "Let's not waste energy on blame." Lisa nodded. "Then what do we do with it?" Ava turned her gaze to the garden. A butterfly hovered near a patch of daisies before drifting off. "We talk about it," she said. "We tell the truth. We don't pretend anymore." Lisa thought about her own life, how many mornings she'd woken up exhausted but powered through, how she hadn't had a physical in over 2 years, how often she skipped meals, drank too much coffee, and told herself she was just stressed. That night, she booked her own checkup. The next day, Ava asked to meet with the hospital's prevention coordinator, a nurse named Carla who specialized in stroke risk education. Ava wanted to understand everything, what she missed, what others often miss. Carla was kind, sharp, and thorough. "You'd be surprised how many patients we see who ignored early signs," she said, pulling out a chart. "Headaches that feel different, changes in balance, vision problems, mild confusion. They think it's dehydration or fatigue, but sometimes it's your body shouting through the fog." Ava listened intently, her hands folded in her lap. "You mentioned skipping blood pressure meds," Carla continued. "That's one of the most common causes we see. Chronic hypertension weakens the blood vessels over time, especially in the brain. One day, the wall gives out," Ava nodded. "And aneurysms? Some are genetic, others are silent for years, but pressure, smoking, even certain medications can cause them to grow. The problem is, you don't feel them until it's almost too late. Lisa leaned in. So, regular screenings would help? Carla smiled. Yes, especially if there's family history or early warning signs. But the best prevention? Awareness, listening, and acting early. After the meeting, Ava asked for pamphlets, not for herself, but to give out at her church when she returned. She even asked Lisa to help her plan a small health awareness talk for the senior group. If just one person listens, Ava said, then this wasn't for nothing. That evening, Lisa sat at Ava's bedside while her mother slowly wrote in her journal. The handwriting was shaky, a mix of cursive and print, but still unmistakably hers. "What are you writing?" Lisa asked. Ava didn't look up. "A list. Things I ignored." Lisa swallowed. "Are you punishing yourself?" "No," Ava said. "I'm remembering, so I don't forget again." She read the first few items aloud. Dizzy in the garden, forgot the word ladle, skipped meds 3 days in a row, told the doctor I felt fine, didn't check my pressure all winter. Lisa listened quietly. Then Ava flipped the page and started a new list. Things I will do now. Take meds every time. Tell someone when I feel off. Book regular checkups. Share my story. Walk. Even slowly. Walk. Lisa leaned over and kissed her mother's temple. "I'm going to make a list too." Ava smiled. "Let's keep each other honest." They sat in silence for a while, just two women, mother and daughter, watching the last of the sunlight fade across the floor. This chapter had almost never happened, but now, every breath, every step, every word spoken and heard, it all felt like a gift, a second chance, not to forget, but to change. It had been just over 7 weeks since Ava's stroke and nearly a month since her aneurysm surgery. Her days in the rehab center had become structured, predictable in rhythm, yet full of tiny victories. Mornings started with balance therapy, afternoons were for speech practice, evenings, quiet reflection and journaling. But on this particular Thursday, something different was planned. Ava had been invited to speak to the new patient group, 6 individuals ranging from their early 50s to late 70s, all recovering from strokes, aneurysms, or traumatic brain injuries. Some were still in wheelchairs, some used walkers, and some, like Ava, were somewhere in between, stable but still rebuilding. At first, Ava hesitated when the rehab coordinator asked. "I'm not a speaker," she said, the old shyness creeping back in. But Lisa had placed a hand on her shoulder and said gently, "Mom, they need to hear you, not because you're perfect, but because you're real." So she said yes. That morning, Ava wore her favorite lavender blouse, the one Lisa had ironed the night before. Her cane was by her side and her notebook rested in her lap. When she entered the room, the small group greeted her with polite nods. Some looked tired, some looked scared, all looked like they needed hope. She settled into the front seat, cleared her throat, and began. "I'm Ava Collins," she said slowly, her voice steady. "I had a brain hemorrhage, and I'm still here." There was a silence, not uncomfortable but expectant. "I didn't see it coming," she continued, "and that's what scared me the most. I thought I was doing everything right. I walked every day, I cooked healthy food, I didn't smoke, I laughed often." She paused, letting that sink in. "But I also ignored my blood pressure, skipped medications, brushed off dizziness. I told myself I was just tired. That stress was normal, that forgetting a word was just age." Several heads nodded. Ava smiled gently. "I learned too late that strokes don't always come crashing in. Sometimes they whisper for weeks before they scream." She opened her notebook and read from the list she had made in her journal the week before. Things I ignored. Headaches behind my eyes, my arm feeling weak for a few minutes, forgetting what room I was walking into, losing my balance in the garden, not recognizing a friend's face for a few seconds. A man across the room, perhaps in his early 60s, wiped at his eye with the sleeve of his shirt. "I don't share this to scare you," Ava said. "I share it because I wish someone had said it to me before I ended up here." She paused, then glanced at the rehab coordinator, who gave her an encouraging nod. Ava looked back at the group. "I want to tell you what the doctors don't always get the time to say, what they wish we knew, the things that seem small but matter more than we think." She lifted her chin slightly. "Number 1, high blood pressure is silent until it isn't. You don't feel it, but it's there, wearing down your arteries like water eroding rock. Another nod. Number 2, fatigue is not weakness, it's information. Your body is always speaking. If you're waking up tired, something's wrong. Don't just push through it, investigate. A woman in the back murmured, "That was me." Number 3, Ava continued, don't wait for pain to take action. My stroke didn't come with pain, it came with silence, confusion, a hand that wouldn't grip, a word I couldn't say. Her voice wavered slightly, but she steadied herself. Number 4, you are not a burden. Say that with me, she added, looking around. You are not a burden. A few in the group repeated it softly. We convince ourselves that asking for help means we're weak or selfish, Ava said. But do you know what my daughter told me last week? She smiled. She said, asking for help gave me a chance to help you. Don't take that from me again. The room was still. A soft reverence settled over the group. Number 5, Ava said finally, her voice quiet now. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to justify taking care of yourself. If something feels off, listen. If you need to slow down, do it. If something scares you, say it out loud. She closed her notebook. For years, I was the caretaker. I didn't think I could slow down. But now I know, if you don't slow down by choice, your body might do it for you. She leaned forward slightly. But here's the good news. It's not too late. You're all here, healing. That means you've been given another chance, just like me. And what you do with it? That's your legacy. A small round of gentle applause followed, not loud, but deeply heartfelt. Afterward, several patients approached her, one in a wheelchair with tears in his eyes, another who clutched her hand and whispered, I needed that more than you know. Back in her room that night, Lisa helped her unbutton her blouse and fold it neatly. You were incredible, Lisa said. I think you gave those people something doctors can't give. Ava smiled. What's that? Permission to feel, to forgive themselves, to begin again. Ava rested her head back against the pillow. Her body ached, but it was a satisfying ache, the kind that comes after doing something that mattered. Maybe this is the real recovery, she whispered. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You mean the walking, talking, writing part? No, Ava said softly. The part where you realize your pain might help someone else heal too. 6 weeks later, Ava stood in her kitchen again. It wasn't the same as before. Not quite. There was a slight tremble in her right hand when she lifted the kettle, and she walked more slowly now, with a cane leaning against the cabinet just in case. But there was something else too, something stronger than her steps or her grip. Presence. She was present in her own life now in a way she hadn't been for years. The sunlight poured through the same window she had collapsed near months ago. It was early morning, the same time of day when everything changed. Ava paused by the sink, hand resting on the counter, and stared at the tile floor. That exact spot, where she had fallen, where the silence began. She bent down slowly, not to pick something up, but to trace her fingers across that place. She wasn't afraid of it anymore. I'm still here, she whispered, and this time I'm listening. Lisa entered the kitchen just then, already dressed for work, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. She handed one to Ava and leaned against the counter with a warm smile. Sleep okay? Best I've had in weeks, Ava replied. Still thinking about the meeting next weekend? Lisa asked. Ava nodded. The local stroke survivor group had invited her to be the closing speaker for their annual awareness event. Word had spread after her talk at the rehab center. People said her story wasn't just inspiring, it was real. And real stories stick. I know what I want to say, Ava said. It's been clear to me since I came home. The day she left rehab, the nurses had lined the hallway and clapped. She had walked out with her cane, head held high, holding Lisa's hand. When she stepped outside, felt the wind on her face again, she cried. Not out of fear, but gratitude. Returning home wasn't easy. Her routines had to change. The house had been adapted with railings and raised chairs. Lisa stayed with her for the first few weeks, just to be sure. But Ava surprised everyone, including herself. She rose early, made her own tea, and even tended to her small herb garden in the backyard with a stool and gloves. Her energy came in waves, but she knew her limits now. She honored them, and she kept writing. In a small leather-bound journal, Ava wrote letters, not just to Harold, but to herself. Letters filled with clarity, with hindsight, with gentle warnings and hopeful encouragements. And now, as the awareness event approached, she decided to turn one of those letters into her speech. When the day arrived, Ava wore navy blue, the same color she wore when she first started her job as a librarian 40 years earlier. Lisa drove her to the community center and wheeled her into the hall, though Ava insisted on standing once she reached the podium. The audience was a blend of patients, caregivers, doctors, and families, some young, most older, all listening. Ava took a breath, placed her hands on the sides of the podium, and began. "My name is Ava Collins. I am a stroke survivor, but I didn't survive because of luck or strength alone. I survived because someone saw me, got to me in time, and helped me fight. But I want to tell you the part I wish I had heard sooner. You don't need to wait for a fall, a bleed, or a hospital room to begin listening to your body. I ignored small things, dismissed headaches, shrugged off skipped pills. I thought it was normal to feel a little dizzy. I thought stress was part of aging, but that silence, the one where you pretend everything's fine, that's where danger lives. If you feel tired, look into it. If your memory slips more than usual, talk about it. If your blood pressure is high, don't watch it. Manage it. My husband died from a stroke, and I almost did too. The difference? This time, someone acted fast. This time, I got a second chance. And I'm here to tell you, every moment since has been a gift I won't waste. So let this be your warning, your reminder, your wake-up call. You are not too busy. You are not too strong to fall. Pay attention. Ask for help. Check in. And above all, don't wait until your body screams. Listen while it still whispers." When she finished, the room stood in silence. Then applause, not polite, not gentle, but deep, thunderous, grateful. Lisa met her backstage, tears in her eyes. "You did it," Ava smiled. "We did it." Later that evening, back home, Ava returned to her journal. She wrote her final entry in the section she had titled, "What I Know Now." You don't have to be invincible to be strong. Healing isn't about going back to who you were, it's about becoming someone wiser. And sometimes, the most powerful warning is a story shared in time. She closed the book, placed it on the windowsill, and looked out at the evening sky. Her life had nearly ended without warning, but now each new day felt like a gentle beginning. Ava Collins' story began with a whisper, a strange headache, a stumble, a quiet, "I'm fine," that masked something far more serious. What followed was a journey no one ever plans for, a stroke, a brain bleed, a risky surgery, and months of painful, courageous recovery. But in each chapter, Ava transformed. She went from silence to speech, from paralysis to motion, from fear to fierce determination. And along the way, she gained something more valuable than physical strength. She gained awareness, clarity, a second chance. She learned to listen, not just to doctors or machines, but to the quiet signals her body had been giving her all along. And more importantly, she turned that awareness into a gift she now shares with others. If you've been brushing off the small things, dizzy spells, skipped medications, unusual fatigue, Ava's story is your gentle warning. You don't need to wait for something dramatic to pay attention. You don't need to collapse to decide it's time to take care of yourself. Your body speaks, and the sooner you listen, the longer you may walk, speak, and live on your own terms. So let Ava's journey be a mirror, a reminder that strength isn't about pushing through. It's about pausing, asking for help, and honoring the life you still have left to live. Because sometimes the most powerful act of survival is the choice to begin again. And today, that choice is yours.